Hello, good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Olivia Horvath, and I'm here with the Prince George's County Memorial Library System. It's my pleasure tonight to join with our wonderful event partners, the Prince George's County Office of Human Rights, in welcoming Walter Dean Myers Grant winner Jennifer De Leon in discussion about her essay collection, White Space, which explores her experiences as a Guatemalan-American woman existing in two cultures. Jennifer De Leon is the author of Don't Ask Me Where I'm From and the editor of Wise Latinas, an assistant professor of creative writing at Framingham State University, and a faculty member in the MFA in creative nonfiction at Bay Path University. She has published prose in over a dozen literary journals and is a Grub Street instructor and board member. Co-hosting our discussion today is my coworker at the Prince George's County Memorial Library System, Kofi Bart Martin of the Oxon Hill Library Sojourner Truth Room, and Kyla Hannington, the outreach coordinator with the Prince George's County Office of Human Rights. So without further ado, I will hand over the conversation to Kofi, and I believe Jen will be joining us with a reading from her book. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kyla. Are you beginning or beginning?
Well, we can maybe, John, would you like to maybe introduce, start us off by reading a little bit and introducing us to your work?
Certainly. Good evening, everyone. It's so great to be here. Thank you, Kofi, Kyla. I'm really grateful for the invitation and just any opportunity to share my writing with a greater audience. And thank you to the Prince George County Library System in Washington, D.C. I wish I could be there in person, but maybe next time, next book. So I wanted to start by reading a little bit from the collection. White Space is a collection of essays. Some have referred to it as a memoir and essays. And in it, I basically write and share stories about my experiences growing up in white spaces, predominantly white spaces. And so the essays are places where I grapple with these experiences. But the book is also about the white space of the page and how I learned to really take up space and kind of use my pen as my sword, right? And take up space on the page. So it tells the journey of me becoming a writer and becoming a published author. And in the book, I also describe a big trip where I moved to Guatemala, which is where both of my parents were born and raised. And it's a country that I have always had a complicated relationship with. And finally, I moved there when I was 28. And so the book is divided into three parts: before Guatemala, during Guatemala, and when I return. So I'll read from the beginning of an essay called Work. And just to give you some context, I set out to travel to Guatemala for 6 months, and I ended up coming home early for a variety of reasons. And my apartment that I had sublet before I left was not available. So I had to live with my parents again and sleep on their pull-out sofa. And it was not the greatest situation. And so a friend recommended that I house sit for this famous author on the coast in Massachusetts. And I took her up immediately. So this is this essay. It's called Work. The morning I left to house sit for the famous author on the coast, I searched in the kitchen cupboard at my parents' house for a travel mug lid. "They want you to what?" my father asked. "House sit." It was 6:30 in the morning on a weekday in July, and he was scrubbing last night's pan in the sink. "What is that?" he asked. "It's like babysitting," I said. My father had worked for almost 4 decades in a computer parts factory after a short stint driving trucks across the country. "Only," I said, "I'm taking care of the house, not any kids." Sometimes I felt like my whole life was spent explaining things. I didn't tell him how famous this particular author was or how he had made millions from the only book he had ever published. Did my father expect that from me? I knew my mother did. Her questions weren't subtle. "How much do you get paid for writing a book? How long does it take? What page are you on now?" My father stared out the window at his garden in the backyard. His tomatoes were doing great. "Are they paying you?" "Yeah," I said, $50 a day. I'll be there for 5 days. I could tell what he was thinking. Only in America would people pay to have someone live in their house. What do they think? The house is going to run away? He placed the clean pan on the stove and reached in the refrigerator for a carton of eggs. Maybe, I mumbled and grabbed the directions. I was grateful for the week of uninterrupted time. I'd been staying on the pull-out couch at my parents' house in Massachusetts the last few weeks until the apartment I had sublet was free again. Every night, one of them watched TV in the living room and the other in the family room, leaving me to type on my laptop on the dining room table, the only flat surface in the house. My parents didn't own any desks. Distracted from the noise coming from two different television sets. Most nights I gave up and microwaved popcorn or poured cereal and milk into a mug and plopped down on the couch beside one of them. I ended up watching 2 or 3 hours of television when I was supposed to be writing. I'd cut short my trip to Guatemala, which I'd taken to learn more about my family's history, to improve my Spanish, and to write. Instead, I had scribbled in journals, gotten bit by a dog, and gained 11 pounds. I came home without an idea for a novel, much less a draft. Upon my return to the States, I alternated my days between teaching adults English as a second language at the local college and answering phones at a tile company in Waltham, where my boss referred to most songs that came on the radio as fucking gay. So, yes, this house sitting gig came at the perfect time. I was hoping that somehow, maybe miraculously, I could breathe the same air as this famous author and in 5 days at last begin the work of writing my novel. I pulled up to the famous author's house, or at least I thought it was his house. As I kept driving, I realized that the house was just a bike shed, mere punctuation to the grand estate. The driveway was at least half a mile long. I could smell the ocean in the distance and hear the gravel crunching underneath the tires. Finally, I parked in front of the blueberry bushes, checked my lip gloss in the rearview mirror. I wore a khaki skirt and a teal polo shirt. Did I look like a respectable house sitter? Preppy enough? Hello, the mister called from the front door. In my mind, he looked like a mister, like a senor. He had thick black hair, kind eyes, and a firm handshake. He smelled like a spa. A spunky, ginger-haired dog barked at his heels. He lifted the dog and allowed her to kiss him on his nose, chin, and mouth. I clenched my toes. At this time in my life, I was still afraid of dogs. The mister led me to the screened-in porch overlooking the bay, where we sat on tan couches, and I pretended to love dogs. Biddy sat on my lap. I could feel her little heart beating. She licked my hand, and I resisted the urge to jump. I'll stop there, but I just wanted to give you a sense of worlds colliding yet again, and how when I returned from Guatemala, I was just a top spinning, looking to land somewhere. But thank you for listening.
Thank you for sharing that with us. And I think it will be a good segue to my first question, which is the invisible leash.
Mm.
It's a good reason for families to keep secrets. While the mainstream American culture prefers having everything out in the open, how do you reconcile your Guatemalan background of keeping secrets with the American upbringing of opening up?
Wow. Yeah, that is a great kickoff question. Secrets, I always say, are the protein of fiction. They're just really great for plot and conflict and tension. But in memoir, in real life, they're more complicated, right? They're not characters I'm writing about, they're people. And so when I wrote this book, I had to reconcile within myself, what am I comfortable publishing? As you know from reading the book, when I was 14, my father ran away from home. He decided that he could not live in the United States anymore, and he started driving to Guatemala. He was homesick. And so he drove as far as Washington, D.C., actually, where you are, and he turned around, came back. And the night that he came back, I was ready to leave the house to go babysit, I think, or go to the mall with my friends. And he walked into the house silently and sat on the couch and didn't take off his coat. And my younger sister was watching cartoons. So I remember the TV was blaring and he just sat on the couch and tears streamed down his face. And we never talked about it, ever, to this day. So of course, naturally, I would write about it in a book to publish for everyone to read. And we still haven't talked about it, but that is the ultimate secret, right? We never mentioned that. But I felt that it spurred me to want to go to Guatemala to learn more about this country and answer the question, or at least grapple with that question of how could my father love a country more than his family? And I know that it's not that simple now, but that was my quest.
Thank you. To follow up on that, you explore different aspects of relationships and marriage in your ethnic community. For me as an immigrant, some of those questions in my community seem stifling. Looking at them from your American perspective, how do you feel about those practices in your Guatemalan community?
Yes, the practices of sharing our secrets, the practices of writing about them are, as you say, very American. And when I, as someone who's straddling two cultures and two really identities, it can be kind of challenging to figure out, what do I write about? What do I publish? What do I share with the world? What is just for me to write in my own journal? And what is something that I feel like I want to explore on the page for others to witness and read? And one of the beautiful, I guess, outcomes of publishing essays and stories is that readers identify with parts and they're able to write to me and say, I experienced this too, or I felt like that too, even though I'm not from Guatemala, or I'm not a first generation child of immigrants, I could still connect to that and relate to that. And for many Latina readers, they've reached out to me and said, I feel seen on the page. I've never seen some of these words in a book. And it could be simple, like mixtas is a type of food, right? But just seeing that in print, I think is very powerful. And so for me, I feel that it's worth whatever criticism I might be getting from Tias who are saying, how could you share that? Why would you do that? But so far, no one said that, actually.
It is really brave to do memoir and write about family and tell some of those stories. And I think doing that dance about what am I going to say and not say, and what shouldn't I say, but I'm going to say anyway. I absolutely love this collection and have many, many things I'd like to talk to you about. But building off of what Kofi is asking, one of the things, and I'm not originally from the United States, so I was own my own ignorance. I'm not saying that it's, everybody listening may not have the same gaps in knowledge that I have. But I will say that as I was reading this, I was so grateful to you for shining a light on a enormous gap in my own knowledge, which is the history of Guatemala. And I'm wondering if you would, I know that is a huge, we could just be here for the next 5 hours, but could you provide, again, assuming that maybe there's some people out there listening who had the same major gap that I have, would you be willing to just share a little bit about that? Because it's so crucial to your family's story and to your journey.
Yes, thank you for that question. I love it. I think that it's so important to ask these questions. And to be totally honest, I didn't know so much about the history of Guatemala. And I went through middle school, high school, college. I took a course in college on Latin American history. And even then, Guatemala was maybe 2 weeks on the syllabus. And whenever I asked my parents, they were kind of quiet about it, kind of like, oh, let's just look forward. And now I understand their complicated history with the country. But essentially, Guatemala is a small country. It's the size of the state of Louisiana, right? South of Mexico. And there are centuries of beautiful art and architecture history. The Mayans are responsible for discovering the number 0. And, yeah, it's a fun fact. And so it's this rich, rich culture. And there are 200 indigenous languages there spoken now. And of course, the Spanish conquered Guatemala, and it went through multiple governments. And in the in the 50s, 60s, there started to be more turmoil. And once the Cold War threat worldwide happened, the United States was terrified that Guatemala would join Nicaragua, Vietnam, Cuba, and become a communist nation. And so what they did was they provided weapons and arms to the Guatemalan army. The CIA provided these, and they basically helped fuel a mass genocide, and 200,000 people were murdered. And the 80s was a bloodbath. And so the Civil War was 36 years long. And during that time, my parents fled the country. And, they didn't flee in the sense of like, it's the dead of night, just grab whatever you can and run. It was a slower kind of fleeing. It was methodical. It was the oldest children go first, and they go to the United States to try and work and send money home. And that is your duty, to put food on the table in this way. And so enter my parents meeting in Los Angeles and then falling in love. My father moves to Boston. My mother follows a year later. My sister is born in Boston. I am born in Boston. My younger sister is born in Massachusetts, and so we're just arriving into this family unit, but the story has been going for a long time before my birth. And I think that's what is so exciting about memoir, is that you can really peel the onion and dig deep and realize that your story is part of a much larger story. But yes, we could be here for 5 hours, but that was like the 2-minute rundown of Guatemalan history.
Oh, thank you. Because I know it just gives so much shape to the whole collection, your whole journey.
Yes. And when I went there, I studied at a language school where teachers were ex-guerrillas. So they had fought in the war on the guerrilla side, and they were working with civilians and really trying to train people in villages to fight against the army that was coming in and murdering these entire villages. They put them in lorries and ship them away and just murder them. So these were teachers who had lived through that. And so in addition to learning grammar and spelling, they were sharing stories of firsthand experiences of the war. And that is something that I never was able to read about in a textbook.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah.
The theme of negotiating teenagehood, adulthood, and freedom pervades your book. Can you comment further on that theme?
Yes. Oh my goodness. I think that my experience growing up was a massive kind of arm wrestle with my father and his strict rules. I would always want to do things like sleep over a friend's house, or go on a camping trip, or have a boyfriend, go to the dance, all these kinds of American pastimes, rituals. But my father would just say, no. And I think because of that, I learned to actually kind of be persistent, which has helped me in my career in writing, certainly. But I learned to negotiate, and I learned to, at a young age, start to balance these identities, where I would say to my parents, you moved here so we would have better opportunities. Well, look at me. I'm getting good grades. All my teachers say I get A's. So you should let me sleep over my friend's house. and I would start to make these arguments with them. And sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But it was really hard when these two identities clashed. For instance, they wanted me to go to college. My sisters and I, that was like their dream, to have a house and to send us to college. And so when I went to college, I found so much freedom, but they wanted me to maybe come home more often, or to go to a school close by, or to, kind of, it was hard. And I wanted to just live on Cape Cod for the summer. I wanted to hang out with my friends. I wanted to drive across country. And luckily, my mother let me do a lot more than my father. So I think that she was living vicariously through her daughters. But yeah, I mean, it's hard. It's hard to negotiate those spaces.
I was actually, as you were talking, I wrote down the word negotiation because as I was reading too, like this, you talked just now, your parents, they had this dream, they'll get home ownership, they'll send you to college. This is really important that they've created this opportunity for you and your siblings. And off you go, and you're seeking this freedom. And I think so much of and even we could go, this is another thing that we could talk about for a long time, but the negotiating of space, right? So writing yourself into existence, negotiating space in white space, yes, and with your parents, like with all of these like intersecting identities. And so I would love to talk to you more about, and I will try to come up with a concrete question for you, but just this idea of negotiating space, and how did you do that as a writer and as a woman,
Yep, absolutely. I mean, it's hard. It's work. It's to code switch. Mm-hmm. It's very taxing. And for many students of color, they're constantly doing that in ways that many white students, not all, but many white students don't have to. Mm-hmm. So what ends up happening is you, like Du Bois said, right? You have these two souls, two identities that are kind of at odds. And what happened to me is that I learned to compartmentalize. So when I was at school, when I was at Connecticut College, I felt like I was one kind of Jen. I was white Jen. Mm-hmm. I tried to talk white. I dressed very preppy. I only shared certain aspects of my own life. I didn't study Spanish. I studied French. And, these were ways of me kind of forging a new identity in a new space where I felt like I could belong. But then when I was at home, interestingly enough, my cousins would sometimes make fun of me and say like, "Oh, you talk like a white girl." Mm-hmm. Right? Or they'd call me gringa, or they'd say like, "Why are you always reading? You get a lot of homework." And I'd say like, "No, this isn't homework. I like reading," And so, and then in publishing, it was really hard for me in the beginning because I would go to workshop and I would bring in stories that I thought sounded like a writer. Mm-hmm. I tried to write like a dead white man.
Right.
I was like, I'll be James Salter, I'll be Ernest Hemingway, and I didn't know what I was doing, And then finally, with the right teachers and great mentors who kind of guided me and said, write like yourself, like hone your voice. That's when I feel like I finally tapped into, was able to draw from the well, and I love that. So I found my voice on the page first, and then that led to other parts of my life. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that negotiating space is real. It's something that I think we can write even more about and talk even more about.
Oh, thank you for that.
Helping your father with his resume.
Yeah.
You titled that chapter White Space. And so I see the sense of one's ability and capabilities, but not given the chance to prove it because he doesn't fit into the formal structure of this new world he's come to that he has to use a resume to, and so there were all these white spaces in his resume. And I've known that in my immigrant community too.
Mm.
What further thoughts do you have on that theme?
Yes, this is the title essay of the collection, White Space. And the story behind it is that one Thanksgiving, I had spent the whole day at my parents' house, the whole day. And only as I was leaving, I mean, I had my coat on, my father casually says, "Oh, I have to make a resume. You have to help me." And I thought, what? I'd never heard him even say that word before. And so I start to help him. And as I'm helping him write the resume, there are very few pieces that I'm able to put in the document in terms of work experience, references, professional experience, education. And there was a lot of white space on the page. And it was a metaphor, I guess, or it was just kind of staring at me, begging me to fill that white space, and I realized that one page, one document cannot possibly tell the story of someone's life. And I was mad at the structure, at the format of a resume, that it would make someone compartmentalize their life in that way when there's so much more to his life. And it turned into an essay that I wrote where the meat of the essay was actually in the footnotes of the resume. And it prompted this whole journey to travel to Guatemala and learn more about him and his story. It's so ironic that the people we're the closest to in proximity, we might know very little about, and I just had never taken the time to ask him these questions. How did you come to the United States? Why did you come? He said that originally he only wanted to come to the United States long enough to work in order to buy a motorcycle. And the moment he had enough to buy a motorcycle, he would go back to Guatemala and keep living there. And my mother was the opposite. She had like a one-way ticket on her mind. She wanted the freedom, the feminism, the opportunities, the education the United States offered her. So I do think gender had a lot to do with it, looking back as well. And we had plans to take our kids, I have two young sons, to Guatemala in March 2020. We had our suitcases packed, passports, everything. And at the last minute, we said, we probably shouldn't get on the plane. And sure enough, the world changed. So I do still want to take the boys there and with my parents, and have that experience. Because I don't want to forget. I don't want my kids not to know where their grandparents are from. Because in a way, they're from there too, and there's something about the book, right, as a means of documentation that will last far beyond all of our lives. And there's a kind of beautiful power to that. And I really wanted to do that. And you're right, writing about Guatemala, it's just there's so little about this country that I just want to write more and more and more.
Oh, that would be awesome. The story about your dad, and I'm pausing here because I'm trying to formulate a question again, which is there's so much I want to talk about, and I guess I'll start with this: the impact to you and your family. You mentioned here, and it's in the book about your dad going, he's going to go to Guatemala. He's leaving the family. He's going to Guatemala. And my sense from reading the book and actually just hearing your words tonight, it doesn't sound to me that you experienced it, or at least you're talking about it, as a deep sense of being left yourself. But I'm wondering can we talk about that? How was that? Like, how did that experience, did you know immediately that it was about the country and not you, or how was that?
I was 14, so I was very self-absorbed in the way 14-year-olds are, but I definitely I think I remember, so he left a note, and I remember the school counselor pulling me aside and saying, "Do you want to talk about this?" And it's all kind of a foggy week, but it was 1 week, and um, but it was very clear that the United States was option B. This was not his preferred place. He wanted us to move to Guatemala, and my mother absolutely drew the line, like, no, like, that's not happening. Our whole lives are here. And for a while, they tried to negotiate, and we thought about moving to Texas, almost like in the middle, like it's
Right.
kind of like, and we
Getting closer.
there. Yeah, get closer. Like he was trying to like inch his way there, and even then, we didn't do it. We didn't do it. But my feeling is that I became very active when I was a teenager, active in the community. I traveled to Zimbabwe when I was 16. I did a lot of community service. I loved writing, so I felt very plugged into American society. And during those years, I think there was a real gap in our relationship. And it wasn't until later, like in this trip in the book, when I go to Guatemala, where we really bond again and develop a new relationship. But the experience was foggy, and yet it's something that at the time I probably shoved away. Like, I'll just shove this in my locker, but now I'm spending decades writing about it. So clearly it had an impact. And I guess I don't feel left in that sense of, okay, left us, because ultimately he came back. And that's, I guess, the point of view, or the part of the story that I'm always careful to include in the narrative.
Thank you.
Yeah.
When I read about you going to put yourself on family planning.
Oh, yes.
and I'm reflecting back to my own culture, where sexuality, promiscuity, religion, and birth control, all these are the big titans.
Yes.
And I said, I understand what she's going through, I think, but I'll get her to talk some more about it.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I was just telling this story today to a group of undergraduates, and some of these themes continue, that divide between child and parent, but culturally as well, promiscuity, sexuality, birth control, we just never even spoke those words, and no one talked about it. And yet people had babies. Sometimes they were married when they had babies. And I was always very curious, like, why aren't we talking about this? And I think a part of me thought about being a journalist for a long time. So I was always asking questions. And my mother likes to teach through stories. So she would tell us stories to give us lessons. And it was always, though, a story or a lesson of like a threat. Like, don't do this or this will happen. And I never really had role models of like how to do this in a way where you respect yourself and your body and your future. And so I felt that writing about this was risky, because I originally published that essay about going to the gynecologist to get birth control. I published it in Ms. Magazine, and it was my first publication. I was 19 years old.
That's a pretty good first publication there.
Yeah. I did an internship there, so I think it helped, to have some connections. But of course, it was a story that was so personal, and I at the last minute called my mother and I said, they want to publish this essay, but it's about this. I don't have to do it. I'm going to tell them no. It's just too much. And she said, no. She said, do it. Publish it. That's great. You wrote it. Have them publish it. And she just continues to surprise me. But it's something where I felt like, yes, it was taboo to go to the gynecologist on my own. But the discrimination I faced there, where the secretary didn't believe that I was in college, and where the nurses were talking behind my back in English, assuming I didn't speak English, that I only spoke Spanish. I asked for a female doctor. They said, sent in a male doctor. Just all of these experiences would have made me leave, but I didn't. I stayed and I did it. And they ended up sending the bill to my parents anyway. The story was totally, it blew up in my face, but it ended up landing well. And I wanted to write about it in case somebody else was experiencing something similar. And I think we're slowly opening dialogue. I don't know how you feel, Kofi, or Kyla, in your own cultures or in the world, if we're just open to talking about sexuality more. And I don't know.
True. In the Ghanaian community, it was almost unheard of. And now 2 Ghanaian young ladies in London have published a book, and they are, I think, on one of these podcasts about how women can enjoy themselves. And the first time I saw and read it on BBC, I cringed. I said, they've stopped being Ghanaians.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's the clash. That's the shift. But I think it's good. It's so, I know what you mean. That feeling of wait, what? This has never happened before. This is new. But I think it's great. Oh, Ghana. Yep.
I'm just Googling trying to find the book, but I haven't found it yet. Do you know the name of it, Kofi? Because we can share it in the chat if you know the name of it.
No, but...
No. Okay, I tried. I did a quick Google, but I'm not a librarian, so I don't have those search skills. Maybe in the background can find it for us.
I'll find it and send it to you later.
You know what's a great book on this topic, sort of, is it's called Zenzele, Zenzele. It's an older book. I don't know when it was published, but the whole book is one letter from a mother to a daughter in Zimbabwe. And the daughter is 16 or 17, and she's about to leave Harare to go study at Harvard. And so the mother writes her this long letter the night before she leaves. And that's the whole book. And it's full of advice and stories and a way to tell her daughter to remember where she comes from. And it's beautiful. I'm drawn to these family stories, I guess.
I'm gonna have to find that for sure. Yeah. I'm glad that that you just were talking about your mom, because that was another question that I had, is to talking about a lot of the book is it's about your parents and your relationship and with maybe more focus on your dad. And we have this story though about your mom going back to going to university, taking a university class, which I just was like, that is so phenomenal. I went back to the university when I was 35, and I was a single mom to 2 kids. And I know what a barrier that was for me, without, as a native English speaker in a native English speaking country. And so I was just blown away by your mom. And so I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about her story and that journey that she had.
Yes, she is a firecracker, my mother. She has such a big heart and such a big soul. And she raised us to really, really strive, and go beyond the minimum, but to always seek more. And I think for her, she felt like her ceiling was unfortunately too low, or kept hitting it, and she wanted to use her daughters still to this day to kind of break those ceilings. And for her, when I was in high school, college, she took her first college course. But before that, she needed to get her GED.
Mhm.
This was a big moment because she and my father went to, in I think the first class. It was at a local high school in the evening. And she was so excited. You know, she had a notebook and pencils and she had a calculator. And off she went to school. And when she came back with my father, we asked her, "How was it? How was it?" You know, and she said, "It was so great." And he said, "It wasn't good. We're not going back." And my mother said, "What do you mean we? You know, you don't have to go
Mhm.
back, but I will go back." And she
Mhm.
did. She went back for 12 weeks or however long the course was, and then she took the exam and she got her diploma. And she took pictures and everything at Sears at the family portrait studio. You know, she borrowed
Yeah.
my sister's cap and gown and she said, "I'm getting pictures." And so she was, I know. And
I
so
seriously just got like I got the full tear reaction. Oh
yeah,
my gosh. Okay.
yeah, she did. She did it. She was like, why not? You know,
Yeah.
and that was her moment. And she wore the cap and gown, and it was so important to her, and it was important to us.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
we saw her do it, and she did take that college course, and I write about it in the book how it was hard, it was complicated for me. She
Mhm.
wanted me, I think, to help her write papers. I was in college at the time, and anytime a parent, I think, asks their child for help, it shifts the power and the dynamics in the relationship. And I think I wasn't mature enough to help her. And I
Mhm.
admit that now. I just was very much in my own bubble and I didn't I didn't help her. And I feel bad about that, you know, and but she is someone who is very great like talking. She would like if the tests were oral, like she would get
Mhm.
an A+ in a second. But writing is a different act, you know, and it was just
Mhm.
a little bit more challenging. Um, but she loves reading and she loves learning and yeah, she's usually at all of my readings. So now that it's virtual, it's been a different thing, you know, but
Mhm.
it's been great to bring her everywhere. And that's what I write about in that essay too, is like I even brought her to Italy for the writing conference. I just feel like none of this will be possible without her. So she will
Yeah.
be my plus one
Mhm.
as long as I can have her be. So
I love that. Thank you.
yeah.
It's-
I may have just one more question before maybe Olivia has some questions on the line. Uh, it was very touching when you all went to the uh, shop to look for a graduation dress. That I think it was maroon, and then it was uh, not possible because of the price.
Yeah.
But also, I've known so many people who would say, uh, when we were poor, we never knew we were poor.
Right. Right.
And so the but the love of your mother to sacrifice even together didn't. You got the dress to go to your graduates. Did you ever feel you were poor? What are your thoughts about? Did you know you were poor?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I'm actually teaching a course right now on poverty and poetry and prose. So themes of poverty in literature, and there's some great texts and books and memoirs and novels on this topic. But many of them deal with it through different intersections, right? Like it's not like I'm writing a book about being poor. It might be it might bleed into parts of the plot or your search for identity in different ways. Uh, you know, so for example, that dress meant so much to my mother for so many reasons. One of which was that she always really took pride in education. And she really felt that education was a set of keys that could open any door. And so I was graduating. It was the ultimate symbol, the diploma. And she wanted me to have that dress. But growing up, I wouldn't say I had that word floating in my mind, right? Like poor. But I definitely knew that my parents worked very hard. I knew that they sacrificed a lot for us. I knew that we shopped at discount stores and that sometimes my mother would clip coupons, often actually, and she would buy pants that maybe were too big for us, but she would sew them so they would fit. And as we grew taller, she could unstitch them and they would still fit. I mean, it's very smart, right? And it's really creative. And she always found ways to make us feel loved and protected. And one thing that she did every year was for back to school, she would call us into the living room and she would give us new clothes, new shoes, new notebooks, a new backpack, a new headband. And she had saved all year and hid these items in her closet. And then the day before school, she would give them to us, and we had these piles in front of us. And I just remember that feeling of like, oh yes, like a gambler with all his poker chips. And I just felt like so excited to go to school. And that was something that she did purposefully. She wanted us to associate that abundance, that power, that good feeling with going to school. Really genius, and she shopped sales all year to collect these items. So I felt the sacrifice on their part, but I didn't feel, I never used the word poverty, but she certainly ingrained in me this guilt. Like if I spend $5 on a coffee, I'm like, ooh, I'm not going to tell my mom about this, that those things don't go away. And that's something we talk about in the literature course too, is that Dorothy Allison writes about this. She says that decades later, she can afford to buy a house, a car, all these things, but she still can't bring herself to apply for a fellowship because she feels that she doesn't deserve it. That that's not for people like me, poor people from the South. And so poverty isn't just about money and tangible wants. It's about the feeling of being less than and worthy of these opportunities. It's really fascinating. I feel like maybe there's a book in there, or at least another essay.
Yeah. I want to take the class. Can I take the class?
Yeah.
I'll talk to you after. Okay.
Oh my God, we got Sherman Alexie, Dorothy Allison, Justin Torres, and then poetry, is Peter Spiro. There's just so many, Nikki Giovanni, Joseph Comagnaca. I love teaching this class. And there is an anthology actually called Growing Up Poor. It's a literary anthology. I have it right here because I'm teaching the class. But, it's edited by Robert Coles, and it's so, so good.
All right, I'm going to place an order for that in just a moment.
I love it.
I do want to let people know who are watching that if you have any questions, please type them into the chat wherever you are, Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter. And our friend O from the library, who's working backstage for us tonight and doing an absolutely fantastic job, will make sure that we get the questions and give them to Jen. So please share any questions with us that you may have. And I can see that we already have a couple questions that have come in. And so the first one that we have is speaking of all these books that you've just recommended, who are you reading right now?
So I just picked up an essay collection by Aminata Forna, and have you? I'm looking up the window seat, notes from a life in motion, and we're doing an event together actually on Sunday at the Provincetown Book Festival, and I can't wait. It's a huge honor to be doing an event with her, but she writes a lot about migration and identity and just so much, but it's a great collection. She's a phenomenal author. And then, with the syllabus that I put together for this, it's just been great to revisit books and even films. There's a film about the the young woman, I'm blanking on her name, but she was homeless and then went to Harvard.
Tara Westover?
Yeah, no, that's
No? Right.
educated or whatever.
Right.
But this is someone else, homeless to Harvard.
Okay.
Yeah, she was homeless in New York, and when she was 16, Liz Murray, that's her name, Liz Murray. So she has a memoir, but she also there's a movie made about her, and it's an inspiring story. You know, it's very dramatic. But
so we have another question that's come in, which is for those. What books would you recommend that are outside of like the kind of typical American canon, that especially has like some more diverse voices? Do you have recommendations of some of those books that you could maybe share with some of us, our viewers?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie comes to mind, a Nigerian author who has written several novels and short story collections. Her novel Americana is brilliant. Yep. And she also has that great TED Talk, The Danger of the Single Story. But I love reading YA, and young adult fiction has so much happening right now. And there are some books that I'll just recommend. So one is called Your Corner Dark, and it's set in Jamaica. It's by Desmond Hall, and it tells the story of a 16-year-old boy, Frankie, who earns scholarship to go to college in the United States. But his father gets ill. He actually gets shot, and Frankie has to decide whether to use that scholarship money to pay for the hospital bill for his father. And so it's using story as a way to kind of really lift up issues in another country that you might not typically just read about, but through a novel you can gain access to that. And I'm looking at my shelf right now. Tan Tan Le, who wrote a novel called Listen Slowly. She's from Vietnam. Actually, Angie Chow, you should check out. She wrote a story collection called Quiet as They Come. And there are stories about immigrants from Vietnam moving to San Francisco. And it's really phenomenal. And We Are Free. We Are Not Free, sorry, by Tracy Chi, which was a finalist for the National Book Award last year. But it's a young adult novel that tells the story of different teenagers during the Japanese internment camps. And so it's just the fusion of history with fiction, like in young adult literature. There's so much happening. It's really exciting. And that's my next book, actually. My next novel, Maya, will be out in August 2022.
Okay.
And this one is set in Guatemala. It's about a teenage girl named Maya, and she's really into trashin. Trashin is fashion that is made from recycled items, so trash, but not trash like banana peels, trash like coffee filters and tablecloths. And anyway, so she's super into trashin, and she gets caught up in some trouble with the gangs there, the Maras in Guatemala City. And she and her mother have to flee the country, and they make it to the Mexico-US border, at which point they're separated. And so it's a lot about current events, but told through the perspective of this teenager who loves her life in Guatemala. She didn't want to leave. It's not a story of someone striving to come north. I feel like that story's been told a lot. This is hopefully a different kind of story, which is how trouble found her, and she really had limited choices. So, and I won't tell you what happens at the end, right after she and her mother get separated. But that comes out in August. So definitely join my newsletter if you want to stay in touch.
Well, can you tell us how we can do that?
Yes. So if you go to my website,
and I actually always been putting your website in the chat. So I think okay. Yep. So we can go to your website and sign up there.
Yeah. Okay. There's a little button that says join my newsletter.
Okay, and so for those of you who've been watching, I know that O has put Jen's website in the chat previously, but my guess is that as I'm speaking, O is probably doing that again right now. We do have probably like a minute left for a quick question. Kofi, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but do you have a question that you'd like to ask Jen just to close us out?
Talking about books and authors, I wonder if you've read Bukia Maketa, who wrote The Bride Price.
No, but you're the second person to mention that, so now I need to find it. The Bride Price.
Yeah, it's on Amazon.
Okay. I will get that.
And the protagonist is also a teenage girl.
Ooh, okay. Oh, thank you for telling me. Where is the story set?
Nigeria.
Nigeria. Oh my goodness. Nigerian authors are like knocking it out the park.
She grew up in, Emekete grew up in Nigeria, but moved to London and was writing from London until he passed away about 3 years ago. But he's got several books. We used to have about 5 of her books in the system, but they are now all gone.
Oh, wow. Okay. Oh, thank you for telling me. Yes, I lived in Nigeria for one summer in Lagos, and it was doing an internship with the United Nations, and it was a really rich experience. So I'm drawn to this part of the world. And actually, when I was there, we drove to Ghana, to Accra, and it was really special, you know. But anyway, we could talk about that forever.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it is that time. So unfortunately, we're coming to a close. I just want to take a couple minutes. And first of all, thank you, Jen, so much for your time being with us tonight. For everybody watching, this essay collection is absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.
And you know, if you haven't had a chance to read it yet, let me tell you the best ways that you can support writers is by buying their books. And you can order this book from Loyalty Books. It's the library's event partner bookstore, and it's got branches in DC and in Silver Spring, or your favorite independent bookstore. And that is just a really great way to say thanks to Jen, but also it's a fantastic collection that I think everybody should read, so go get it. And Kofi, you've been a fantastic co-host. Oh, doing everything backstage. Thank you so much. The library system, absolutely wonderful event partners to us, the Prince George's County Office of Human Rights. We do have a few more really, really cool events coming up with the library that I'd like to tell you all about. Next week, September 20th, we are talking to C.T. Salazar, who's an absolutely amazing poet. If you haven't had a chance to check out C.T., maybe give him a quick Google and see what he has going on, and then join us on September 20th for this wonderful conversation. We also have on October 6th, we're welcoming labor leader Dolores Herta in conversation. We're thrilled to have this absolute lion of civil rights and labor organizing talking with us on October 6th. You can learn about that and a bunch of other wonderful events we have coming up one of two ways: by going to our friends the library at pgcmls.info/events, or by going to our very long URL, tinyurl.com/PGCOHR events. I don't know how to use tiny URL, so that's what it is. Thank you everybody for being with us tonight. And Jen, again, it's just been such a pleasure. Your work is fantastic. Thank you so much for all of your time.
Thank you so much, both of you. Thank you very much.